Hi everyone, this is Sam here, a current college student at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. Welcome to my podcast, College Conscience, where we talk about the good, the bad, and everything in between with the college experience. With each episode, I focus on a different topic pertaining to college life with a different friend, and I really want to hear their perspectives and see what advice they have for me and anyone who might listen about that specific topic. Some examples include health and wellness, academics, professional career, exploration, and even more. So if you're interested in any of those topics, please stick around and hear what my friends have to say. Hey Brandon, thank you so much for being on my podcast. I really appreciate it. Would you like to just quickly introduce yourself as well as our topic of club culture today?
Absolutely. So my name is Brandon. I am a junior here at Georgetown, originally from Spring, Texas, but majoring in international political economy. And for me, I feel like club culture has been a really big part of like the Georgetown campus experience, but also like the college experience for so many other folks, especially because it kind of shapes the way that you kind of approach your day-to-day interactions with folks, your passions, your interests. And I think while we often really talk about the downsides of club culture that is built in a way that it feels sort of ideally like a meritocracy, but in reality, a lot of really qualified folks are like often excluded or not able to participate in things that they like really wanted to do. I still think there's a lot of paths that you can still ultimately take that will help guide you towards your interests and your passions.
Yeah, for sure. What clubs are you personally like most involved in?
Absolutely. So I think first and foremost, the organization I've been spending most of my time in over the last few years has been the International Relations Club and their partner nonprofit, the Georgetown International Relations Association, or GIRA. They mainly focus on promoting youth education and international affairs abroad. And I think that to me has been really interesting, especially from the perspective of like youth education, youth empowerment. And another organization I think I spend a lot of time in is the College Democrats on campus, whether it's knocking doors on weekends, reaching out to really cool Georgetown alumni and getting folks involved in like the progressive movement on campus. I've also found that to be really interesting, given that like it's probably in line with some of like the more broader like career ambitions I have in helping, help elect officials who are dedicated to the progressive cause.
Yeah, for sure. How did you get interested in that career goal you just talked about with like politics and especially on the progressive side? Like, where do you think that stemmed from?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think for me, it started out with like a personal story in that like at home, I felt like some of my representation was not made out to be what they like. Basically, the congressman who represented me was initially not as responsive as he said he would be when he ran for office. And I think as a result, a lot of the other like high schoolers with me felt really interested. But then when I came to Georgetown, I found that, there are other folks out there who have like-minded shared values. And as a result, I think it's become really interesting to, after working on a campaign myself sophomore year and freshman year of college here, I think it's been really cool to learn a little bit more about the process.
And as you came to campus and got involved with these specific clubs, did they match your expectations of what you wanted out of them, which I assume both was like the work, but also the communities? And if they didn't in any way, like how did they differ?
Yeah, I think they both matched expectations over time because I think initially in both organizations, you're obviously exposed to a lot of different people, seniors who are graduating, but also like freshmen who are with you in the same kind of boat. And you're trying to kind of navigate the waters of what those organizations look like. So I think it took a lot of time and adjustment in terms of finding kind of my niche in both organizations. And so I think in that sense, they're similar, but they're different also because I think like college Dems is not structured in a way where people are continuously trying to rise to the top. Like there's no like big CEO position or like big like leadership hierarchy that like exists in other organizations on campus, even like similar to GIRA and the IRC. And that being said, I think that difference has really shaped my experience in different ways too, because I think within like GIRA, it's all about, finding folks who are just as passionate and seeing how they can grow kind of in more of like a club capacity, I guess, but also like, fulfilling the nonprofit's mission. Whereas with college Dems, it's more so like helping people find their own interest in politics. So I think that is the kind of difference there.
Right. So I know you've already touched on this in passing, but I'm curious how you feel like at Georgetown clubs help people find their passions perhaps outside of the classrooms and the classes that they take.
Yeah, definitely. I think whenever, a lot of us are considering, the schools that we want to go to and ultimately what major we apply to, what school we choose to go to within our like broader university context, I think a lot of the times it's more so focused on what you can learn specifically through like your major, your minors and things like that. But I think the added value and like the inherent benefit of organizations and clubs that you can participate in is that, you have the possibility of trying things out semester by semester, year by year, and taking it one step at a time. Whereas with classes, you sign up for your five and you're kind of stuck with them unless you choose to withdraw or try and add in last minute during ad drop. So I think the flexibility of clubs inherently are like built so that you have the opportunity to explore some interests that may go nowhere, but other interests that you feel really, really committed to and involved and you want to get more involved in. And so I think that on like an abstract level is like why I think clubs are important, but also like specific to my experiences and also other folks' experiences that I know. Some of the organizations that, maybe they joined their junior year or senior year, they found really, really interesting and inspiring. And that like takes them in a whole different direction after, graduating. And I think that exemplifies how clubs in a sense do a lot in terms of shaping the like future that you like the future after graduation.
Yeah, and I'm sure a big part of that club experience are the communities you have. And I'm curious for the clubs that now you're most involved in, how do you feel like those communities were when you just joined as like a freshman or early on in your college career where you were just trying to get involved? And now, how do you feel like your role as a leader in these clubs where you're kind of shaping the community and trying to make it stronger? So both like when you were on the receiving end more and now when you're more on the planning and building side.
Definitely. I think I was really fortunate coming into both of these organizations that, they kind of opened they were like welcoming us with open arms. And I think that was really important, not only for me, but also because of like the Zoom freshman year that we had. It made it so it wasn't as, I guess, isolating in a sense when we were like all at home. And I think now, like, even I guess in the transition between when I first started in those organizations and where I've landed now, year to year, there's always been new folks who are always really open in terms of like finding new experiences. Like sophomore year, I decided to travel with the Model UN team, and I found like a new community there who was really open. And even though I've like chosen not to compete this year, those folks are still just as welcoming and just as happy to see me. I think as a leader now in these organizations, obviously the perspective changes a lot in terms of really wanting to promote inclusivity and making sure that folks feel A, that they want to be there, and B, that they are continually also able to contribute. And I think that perspective, thinking back to what I had felt my freshman and sophomore year to now as a junior, kind of trying to welcome new folks to campus and to these clubs, it has been a challenge, I would say, at times to try and figure out what are the best ways to make people want to come to these events or want to feel like they can join a greater community, but also making sure that they can also, I guess, contribute to some extent too.
For sure. And do you feel like you have pretty much found those balances? Do you feel like you're still working on them? Like, where do you think you are with that?
Yeah, I think it's definitely like both something like it's definitely from where I like, I guess, after the end of sophomore year, start of junior year, there's obviously goals that you set in terms of like they're not explicit. I would say they're more so things that you kind of think about in terms of, are we seeing like general retention of like folks, especially those with like marginalized identities who traditionally drop off from those clubs or may not be as engaged throughout the year, or they'll find other passions, and also seeing like the level of commitment and participation from folks who may not have been previously interested. And I think like when looking at it from that lens, I feel like I've definitely felt like I've been successful to some extent in making sure that we are actively promoting, efforts to make people feel more like at home in a community. That being said, I think it's still always a work in progress. I think you should always strive to do more and to do better. And like a lot of the organizations that I'm in, even on a like lower commitment level, I'm seeing that happen as well. And I think that that's something that every organization really prioritizes and ought to prioritize.
Right, and I really like that last point about when you just mentioned like some of the clubs that you aren't as involved in.
Yeah.
I'm curious that now you're pretty into your third year
Hmm.
of college. You've had time to like explore and shop around. How have you figured out like the priorities with the clubs, like which clubs to prioritize and which ones to have less of a commitment? Like how did you come to that for yourself?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think that that prioritization came a little late for me because I think a lot of the times, and I like attribute some of this to Zoom, but also a lot of it falls on me too. But I think like what should happen ideally, like the traditional experience, I would say, is like you sign up for like 7, 8, 9, 10 clubs during your club fair, you drop off a few of them, and then eventually you settle on like one or two maybe. And I think like technically I'm still like pretty well committed in like three organizations. That being said, I still think that like the ones that have required the most time out of me have been College Dems and the Georgetown International Relations Association, or GIRA. That being said, for me it came like the process of figuring out, you know, the organizations that I was able to spend more time in and commit to. Often, like I would say, I also was fortunate in that there are some extraneous factors like studying abroad next semester that would really prevent me from engaging in certain activities I did sophomore year. The first that comes to mind is like forming a family in a lot of the organizations that I did last year, and like, you know, upperclassmen mentor underclassmen. And I think that leaving them hanging sophomore or leaving them hanging in the spring semester while I'm like enjoying life abroad is just not a great thing to do. So while it felt a little, I don't know if disappointing is the right word, but it felt a little like bittersweet that like I'd have to turn down, you know, like mentoring folks. I think that that also in a sense freed up time that I could also be using to like commit to the organizations I'm already in. So I think that's one example where it's a matter of finding, you know, the people, the interests, but also there are other factors that obviously influence the organizations that you ultimately choose to prioritize.
Brandon has definitely been around the block with Georgetown clubs. Now let's hear about a particularly meaningful experience he had working with Chinese teenagers over the summer between his freshman and sophomore year. For sure. And as you like reflect on your time in these clubs, were there any specific moments where you felt like you had a really big moment of fulfillment or you like really could see the work that you were putting into the clubs and the rewards out of it?
Yeah, definitely. I think back to like one of my first experiences with GIRA, or the Georgetown International Relations Association's global section, where like in that, I guess, I don't want to say department, but in that division of GIRA, we focus on helping students abroad. And I was a teacher for debate and logical reasoning for like a rotating class of like 14 to 15 middle school students in China. And we were teaching them virtually due to the pandemic. And I think even though, you know, we had those barriers of obviously a language barrier in addition to teaching on Zoom, which is always and will continue to be a challenge, I still found that, you know, these students were initially really shy and not really interested in talking about, you know, claim or an impact in an argument. But ultimately, like by day three, by the time that they like were talking about really things that they were passionate about, I could see that, you know, they were able to individually grow as a result of like the classes that I was teaching, in addition to like the other teachers who are working together with me on like, you know, teaching different parts of like the general curriculum. And so I found like whenever I was like watching them like debate in their like first Model UN conference, for a lot of them, they had that confidence that they kind of found throughout that process, and that having that opportunity in a week's time to like build that confidence for those students was something that I found really fulfilling. And it's why I continue to engage with the organization at large, because I think being able to provide that impact to students on a more direct basis, to me is something that is like, it's part of like a greater purpose that a lot of us, that I personally feel like I have, like here in society in general.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm really glad you had that experience, and I'm sure those kids are really lucky as well to have had that experience. That was an amazing story by Brandon. Now, as we continue onwards, let's hear about how Brandon will continue to find passion and meaning in his clubs going forward. Just as like a wrap-up question, I'm curious what advice you might have for specifically Georgetown students, and this is kind of twofold, but on one side, like if they're underclassmen and still trying to figure out what clubs they're interested in and the priorities, like what advice you would have. But then on the flip side, as juniors and seniors, like how do they make the most of the time they have left with their clubs?
That's a great question. I think for, first years and sophomores, like the advice is probably to take it day by day. Like think of, the things that you're doing for these organizations, the types of responsibilities you're taking on, and asking yourself and reflecting if these are, things that you genuinely enjoy. A habit I like to do, which I didn't do this semester, sadly, is I like to write an email to myself in like August and September, walking through my expectations, not only for classes, but also for clubs, and like kind of foreshadowing like, oh, did this happen? Do you feel like, the time that you're spending in this organization is well worth it? And I think that whenever you after you finish your final exam and you're reading that email back to yourself, that's one way you can check back on like getting a pulse check on whether the organizations you're a part of are meaningful and impactful. For juniors and seniors, I think the advice is a little bit similar in that there is always more time. It's never, I guess, too late to find a new passion. Obviously, like if it's senior spring, probably a little late. But beyond that, I know friends who, join an a cappella group, they're like junior spring, and they like are really, really having a good time senior year now. And I think that shows that, things that you may not have perceived as passions and interests, they can always evolve in a different direction. So with the time that you have left, obviously you've probably already chosen the organizations that you did for a reason, and it's probably great to stick with them and commit to them, but like don't force yourself in a box. Even like if you feel like there's something that catches your eye, maybe it's something that you'll be willing to try and do.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thanks, Brandon, so much for those thoughts. I'm sure they will help anyone who listens to this and has any thoughts or concerns about clubs. And just thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. Thank you so much for checking out that episode of College Conscience with my guest. If you want to see or hear more episodes, go visit College Conscience on Spotify, where I'll upload new episodes every Monday and Thursday. Thanks for listening.